All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation. Brenda Peterson is the author of over 20 books, including Duck and Cover, a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. Her memoir, I Want to Be Left Behind, was selected as a top 10 best nonfiction book by the Christian Science Monitor and an Indie Next Great Read by independent booksellers. Peterson's latest book is Wolf Nation, chosen as a Best Conversation Book of the Year by Forbes magazine. Her work has appeared on NPR and in publications such as the New York Times and Oprah's O magazine. Her new kids' book is Catastrophe by the Sea, and her new novel, Railroad Girl, is forthcoming in spring of 2023. So welcome, Brenda.
Thank you, Claire.
And now for our featured author, Kip Robinson Greenthal worked in school and public libraries and founded Seattle Arts and Lectures award-winning Writers in the Schools program. She has written several short stories, and her first novel, Shoal won the 2020 Landmark Prize for Fiction. Kip lives with her husband on Lopez Island, Washington, and she's here tonight to talk about her new novel, this beautiful book right here, Shoal. So please welcome Kip Robinson Greenthal and Brenda Peterson.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. So I have so many gratitudes tonight. Brenda advised me not to be too long, but there's some I'm just going to include. For a book can't come into the world without the incredible support of independent bookstores like Village Books. It can't come out into the world without the support of literary champions like Claire McElroy Chesson, events coordinator at Village Books, who works tirelessly to support authors. And to my publicist, Mary Bisbee Beek, who's been my Sherpa and made the connection for me with Claire at Village Books. And a huge gratitude to Leslie Browning of Homebound Publications, who honored me with the Landmark Prize and a publishing contract. Claire did such a beautiful job introducing Brenda. I had a lot of the same mentions of accolades, but I get to bring in I have another way of introducing Brenda. I think most of you know, through her work as a memoirist, nature writer, and novelist, Brenda's curiosity about and respect for nature radiates through her over 23 books. Beyond all of Brenda's accolades as a writer, Brenda is at heart a teacher. She has been my writing mentor for over 15 years, where I've been in a class with her and my friend Claire Meeker, who's also published many books. And most recently, Brenda's Wednesday night class I've joined and filled with gifted writers. We study everything from exploring the craft of the omniscient narrator and third person limited to having exercises, getting to the heart of our inner critics that exist in all of us. Brenda even asks us to give them names. Brenda is truly a literary sage in the art of teaching writing, and I thank Brenda so much for being here tonight.
Oh, Kip, thank you. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn attention back to you as the author and ask a few questions, and always be watching. And I think Claire will also be helping us with the Q&A if people have other questions. But Kip, if you look up here, you'll see that beautiful photograph of the seal, which Claire and I both recognized as a silkie, which is the legendary Celtic and also in many other folklores, the human metamorphosing into the seal. And your book has a ghost story and a lot about silkies. So I would love to hear you talk about how you used that mythological creature and the real creature in Shoal water.
Well, you know, it's such an interesting process, writing fiction. I was first inspired to write Shoalwater from an accident that actually occurred while I was living in Nova Scotia, where a rogue wave came and topped over the Cape Island boat and a young boy. And I think what happened for me in the metamorphosis of the story, when I left Nova Scotia and moved back to the Pacific Northwest, at my old family farmhouse, I'll always remember sitting in the library and I wrote the first Silkie legend. And I realized, even though it was the accident that I first started writing about, the Silkie came right in my first formative beginning of the book, being there and saving Basil. And it truly happened from the unconscious. The accident was clear in my mind, but somehow the Silkie just came in. And I think it must be from the concept of when something very powerful and unexpected, like a rogue wave, can come in and disrupt and change one's life so quickly. There is grace, and I see the Silkie legend as I see the seal as a form of grace. So in the opening of the book, where you meet Basil Tannard and the Silkie, it is indeed the seal that saves Basil Tannard's life. And that becomes a fugue, kind of using a musical term, that goes through the whole story.
And it's a beautiful ghost story, and it opens the book. And later we may have time to hear that, a bit of that story. But Kip, you're also not just a mythologizer and a fiction writer, but you're deeply involved in conservation and environmental issues. And I know we have people tonight who are also deeply involved. So maybe you can speak a little about the Salish Sea, which we both see as a muse, and what you feel about the marine mammals that are surrounding where you live up there in the San Juans.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of Nova Scotia, where I lived from 1971 to 1983, that is a period of time when the cod fisheries were dying. And the inshore fishing communities, the fishermen, were aware of this. They had just recently developed the scallop dragger, the scallop boats that would go out, and these big iron scrapers would drag along the ocean bottom and disrupt the ocean floor, which meant the lobsters, scallops were dying off, and the cod fisheries were also dying. So, in terms of shoal water, this particular story that takes place between 1971 and 1978, that's what I was addressing in terms of the fisheries in the Atlantic. I haven't written yet about the Salish Sea. I have a very good friend who's just released a book called Writer in a Life Vest by Iris Gravel, and she's addressing those issues in the Salish Sea. I certainly am aware and am being as informed as I can be, but that the Salish Sea is not actually in shoal water. It's the North Atlantic off the coast of Nova Scotia.
But you have a rogue wave story, and we have rogue waves here and in Nova Scotia. Why don't you tell everyone here that lovely story?
Well, again, it's this whole thing of where fiction comes in with true life experience, the way the accident, which happens 2/3 of the way through the book, kind of merges with a seal coming in and saving. So, in terms of the rogue wave, when I lived in Taiwan, this was during the Vietnam War, I actually was in Taiwan on the coast scuba diving with a group of people. And we took a break and we were sitting on the rocky ledge. The ocean was coming in towards us, and the waves broke 20 feet beneath us. And there must have been 20 of us just lined up looking down into the ocean and chatting and not thinking anything, when all of a sudden the sea pulled back And it just paralyzed all of us, and it came over all of us and just threw us, picked us up and threw us, knocked off our bathing suits, our rings, whatever we were wearing, against the shore. Several people were seriously hurt. Luckily, I just got a bunch of cuts and bruises, but it was one of the most startling experiences. I was only 23 at that time. And I think it just impacted my whole mind and wanted to find its way out in a story. I guess that's what we do as writers. We store things in our subconscious, and somehow the rogue wave manifested itself twice in Shoalwater. And I guess how I see the rogue wave is the unexpected. In terms of studying it, I do have a number of different quotes in the book trying to describe from an oceanographer's point of view how the rogue wave actually comes about, a series of waves that build up. Scientists could explain it much more than I can, but essentially the rogue wave comes unexpectedly and just throws everything out within the time it plays itself out. And I see that in what happened to Basil Tanner, and then later in the story when Andy takes his son Petey out fishing and they go offshore in the inshore areas, the shoalwater areas, and a huge rogue wave comes in and knocks over the Cape Island boat.
So Kip, we've worked together for 15 years on Shoalwater, and I'm so proud of you for winning this very prestigious award. But throughout all of the ups and downs of your work, and you had to raise a family, beautiful daughters, and you also were very, very involved in the literary world here, as Claire has pointed out. But would you say that the rogue wave is a good metaphor for how the book kept coming back and overwhelming you, even when you were writing other things?
Yes. Shoalwater never, it just kept, the characters, it's the characters. I mean, certainly the rogue wave, but I think in learning, when, they always say that it's either an event or a character that kind of spawns the novel. Shoalwater was definitely spawned by this accident. And I think in order to understand all the characters who were involved in this particular accident, I had to learn all about the Nova Scotians who lived in the inshore fishing community, and all about the young Americans who came to Nova Scotia to start a whole new way of life, mixing the risk and adventure of starting over again after their disillusion with the Vietnam War. So it was a long process of coming to know all of the characters. And I think what happened for me, I fell in love with them, writing about them. But I got the interest of agents, but somehow for a long time, the story didn't quite work. And Anne Depew, my current agent, but who was at heart an editor,
Yes.
read the book and it was chronologically written. It started with the seal legend and then opened in the inshore fishing community. And then in part two was when Andy and Kate came to Nova Scotia and lived in Andy's summer home. And she suggested that I start the book with Andy and Kate coming to Nova Scotia. In other words, moving to forward present narrative. And all of the work that I did in that first part, knowing the Nova Scotian characters, I dropped in through flashback. And so that was my huge revision. And I do have Anne Depew to thank for that, because she had a way of asking me the right questions, and I worked very hard. But then it's true, I had to leave the book when I founded Writers in the Schools, because that took up all my energy. So that's when I was writing shorter stories and meeting still with you, Brenda. You were still believing that I could write and someday publish. And I worked with Claire Meeker at that time too. It's before joining the Wednesday class. So that's,
I didn't want to be such a hard taskmaster, but I really believed in this book, Claire. And writers need other writers. You know, New York publishing has become very distant. It's in a bit of a free fall because of the pandemic. And it's really important that we have the community of one another
yeah.
so that we can call if we get a rejection or we can brainstorm. You know, in our evening class, the advanced class that you are in, we often just say, let's brainstorm the plot. Let's look at ways the plot is not working. Let's look at characters. And I'll never forget once I said to you during this bit of a hiatus when you actually left the novel to do other writing and other things, aren't you lonely for your characters? And you had a look on your face I'll never forget. And you were very thoughtful because you are a thoughtful author. And you said, terribly. I miss them terribly.
Mhm.
And then I knew you'd be back
Yeah, yeah,
to
that's
your
true.
book. Can you talk about what sustained you all of those years for this one book? I know you loved your characters, but what else kept pulling you back, like the gravity of the sea?
Well, I remember taking a walk in the Arboretum with my husband Stanley after I'd written my first kind of draft and really coming to know the characters. And I remember just kind of collapsing on a bench and thinking, would I be able to do honor to these characters? Do I have the ability in my brain power, my creative writing power, to represent these characters to the best of my ability? Because I genuinely wanted to do that. I didn't want black and white stick figures. I didn't want one man to be, alcoholic and a bad character, and one woman to be good and the angel character. I wanted to bring all of humanity to all of the characters, which was my big challenge. And I can tell you truthfully, the easiest characters for me were the Nova Scotians because they were most like me. I worked in the Lunenburg Library. I had a wonderful opportunity to meet many people who came from Lunenburg and the inshore fishing community. The hardest characters were the ones most like myself, Kate and Andy. Um, and I had to work like mad to just make Kate totally different from me. She's similar to me in that she took the risk to jump in a yellow Chevrolet truck and drive to Nova Scotia, which very few people understood. But then at that point, when she got to Nova Scotia, I had to really work hard at fictionalizing her and also fictionalizing Andy. Andy is not at all the person I went to Nova Scotia with. So I guess it's really, I would say Shoalwater has taught me the craft of writing. I mean, for example, you, Brenda, you've written many, many books, and I'm sure you probably look at all the different memoirs, your children's books, your novels, and you learn from each particular book. For me, I seem to have learned through these different stages of Shoalwater, learning the craft of using the omniscient narrator, making decisions when to be in third point of view, limited third person point of view. I mean, the learning curve was huge for me with Shoalwater, and
Yes.
that was my process. And it was good to be away from it for a while, because when I came back, I had more objectivity.
Right. And now that you've published it and you've had wonderful reviews and people have read it and come up to you and, complimented you on it and engaged you, what is your feeling about the book?
Oh,
Are
that's a
you
very
grateful? Are you We didn't prepare that question. It
no,
just came to
no,
me.
it's good. I'm glad you're asking me a question we didn't prepare. I'm
Yes.
I'm okay, I'm learning. I have learned a lot from this book going out to the public. I'm learning to let go. It hasn't been always easy. People have different responses, And some have been very open with me about their different responses. And so it's caused me a lot of pondering, and recognition. All right, I did everything I could in terms of how the characters led me through this story, but I have been taken by surprise by some of the questions people have asked me, which is good.
Like, for example, Kip, what questions have surprised you?
Well, I got asked a question. I think the love triangle does trigger a lot in people, and it, brings up questions of betrayal, fidelity, um,
Yes.
the true love that can exist between two people, friendship. So I have two men who were friends since they were children, two women who just meet each other, Kate and Verlene, and their own friendship, and yet this kind of simmering love triangle that develops between Ivan and Kate that is very hard for the other characters. And people have reacted to the love triangle in a variety of ways. Some people really
Yeah.
understand it, and other people say, why did Ivan betray Verlene? I've just gotten this huge range of reactions. And I've learned to just, my daughter Jenny, I was talking to her recently, she said, Mom, you've let the book go. This is your story, and people are going to interpret it in different ways. And yeah, so
But remember, Kip, you resisted the love triangle as the author. Remember?
you've said that to me before, and I don't remember that. That's so
Oh,
interesting.
I can remember the exact slant of light across the room when I said, "This is a love triangle." And you said, oh no, I don't think it's a love triangle. That was about 10 years ago, maybe.
That must have
And
been,
then
that's so
maybe it
fun.
was longer. But then you saw it. It was because Ivan was so shy around Kate, and
Mhm,
you didn't know if you could handle a love triangle. It's very complex,
mhm,
as you found out.
mhm. Yeah, it
But
is.
I think it makes the book. I think it's one of the hearts of the book to have those three people, and you really do explore friendship and the largesse of it and the limits of it. And so perhaps you can say a little bit about that friendship in the book. I mean, you've talked about Verlene and Kate. Verlene is an older, wise woman, and
Yeah.
she's Nova Scotian, and she does take Kate under her wings.
Hmm. Well, I think really, there's Lisa Gresham wrote a wonderful review, and I think she really got to the heart of what I was trying to do, and I'll just read it to you,
Please.
because it gets right to the point of love. While not exactly a romance novel, the many shapes of love can take is a central theme of Shoalwater. Fractured love, dissolving love, the love between parents and children, the buoyant love of friendship, and in the case of Ivan and Kate, the restraint of love. And I realized she just captured exactly what I was trying to create, the many different forms of love and the unexpected that can come in and startle. And that's really what this story is, and two different cultures, Kate and Andy coming to a completely different culture and trying to become and accepted by the inshore fishing community. That also was a great challenge for them to really perceive them and be accepted by them.
Isn't it wonderful to have such a well-written review and someone who actually understands the book?
I know.
It's like its own form of literary love, and I think you should put that beautiful review up on your office desk and look at it whenever you look at a blank page and feel
Mhm.
frightened. Let's talk a little bit before we take questions about rejection,
Mhm.
because certainly
Yeah.
many people here have dealt with rejection. You had a lot of rejection and a lot of, you know, experiences with agents and editors who asked one thing and Sometimes it broke your heart a little bit, but how was it? How did you handle that rejection?
Well, I had a variety of rejections at a variety of times. When I wrote my first draft and sent it out,
Yes.
that's when I got the interest of Chris Tomasino. And she said, it just wasn't finished. She was interested to stay in touch. And that was hard. And actually, Mary Bisbee Beek put me in touch with an agent, Cynthia Cannell, and she took an interest in Shoalwater. This is before I started working at Seattle Arts and Lectures. And she's the one who asked the famous question, why would an educated young woman jump in an old yellow truck and drive to Nova Scotia with someone she barely knew? So I thought, okay, I've got a lot to figure out here. And then I had the 10-year hiatus and then started working with Anne Depew, and that's when I did the whole revision of chronology and flashback forward, so on. And Anne sent it out. I think it must have been over a 3-year period. A lot of time went by. And I got what I guess you'd call very nice rejections. I mean, it wasn't just like a form letter, but someone would
Right.
write, not quite enough. I'll always remember that one. There's just not quite enough. And that's when Anne said, okay, let's go back, roll up our sleeves and just try to flesh this out. And so I did have some other readers come in at that point and go through the book and just try to really ramp up the tension. That's really what I had to do. And, in a funny kind of a way, we use some of my drafts of Shoalwater for recycled paper. And sometimes when I'm printing something off and I see a part of my old version of Shoalwater that's kind of the lengthy, because the original length of Shoalwater was 394 pages. And I admit, I miss kind of the longer, old-fashioned way of writing Shoalwater. My friend Ollie Smalders was totally against my changing the book to make it, more of a page turner, which is kind of, I would admit, I kind of ended up doing. And I miss some of the languorous sections, where there was just a lot of time and spending time in the village with Carl and uh, his brother Will and Lena. It was a much longer novel. Now I think people, frankly, don't have as much time or patience. And so the book was very heavily edited. I will admit that. And sometimes I'm just thinking, okay, I followed that path and that's what happened.
Well, I hope you kept some of those files, Kip, because you may do a sequel, you may do something else, you may do a memoir about your time in Nova Scotia. And I always tell my writing students, just have old computers that are nothing but basically, file folders. And you can go back because there might be something quite beautiful and lyrical and languorous that you wrote that you really would miss in something else that you would write. It could go to other characters. So talk about recycling. I think it's really important that you don't lose it. Don't shred it.
Yeah.
Have it somewhere in a file folder, because I was just editing today something on my new novel, which actually is a mystery. Um, and I found something I wrote 8 years ago. And, in our class, we have some archivists like Laura and Lindsay who have journals from their earlier days that are incredibly treasured now because they can lift things out of their younger years and use it in their memoir.
Okay.
So don't shred it.
Well, I
Keep
have,
that beautiful lyrical writing. You have the files.
I
Okay,
do. I've
great.
saved them. I've saved about four different versions of Shoalwater. Yeah,
Good,
yeah.
good. I do want to check in with Claire. I see that we have some chats and maybe some Q&A.
Um,
Claire, would you like to take over?
well, sure. And you said a word just now, Brenda, that piqued my interest. You said sequel. So I'm wondering if is that a possibility for Shoalwater?
I've had many people ask me that. Um, I wasn't planning to write a sequel. I really had hoped to end the book in such a way that people could use their own imaginations for what happens to all of the main characters. And my granddaughter, Daisy, who's 13 years old, said to me not too long ago, she calls me Gagi. She said, Gagi, I would really like you to write a book next that I can read. And so I've really had that going around in my brain where I could possibly, I don't know if it would be a young adult novel or, but I am thinking a lot about writing a book that does take place. I am a fiction writer, so it will take place in the Salish Sea, and I'm kind of suspicious that the seal will find its way back into my story. And I'm very involved with the growlers, how they're impacting the islands. And the EA-18 Growler, the warplane, they're stationed in Whidbey Naval
Oh,
Air Base. And they've impacted, this is getting into an environmental issue in the Salish Sea. They've greatly impacted
Yes.
the quality of life and also the sea itself and the orca whales and the natural habitat in the area. But as a way to try to make peace with the growlers, I'm sort of imagining, I shouldn't give it away, and I may totally change my mind. But I might write about a female, um, a woman who becomes the pilot of a growler and goes through kind of a whole character change in her experience of flying a warplane. So that's a
interesting.
little
And
different.
didn't you say you saw a photo?
I saw a photo of
Didn't you say you saw a photo? Yeah.
So I've worked hard on the Growler issue, and when I saw a photo of Jill Biden shaking the hands of a woman Navy pilot of the Growler aircraft, I thought I have to change my attitude about all
Hmm.
this.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
I think it would be really great to read a book about that and also to read a YA novel by you. So a young adult for your 13-year-old.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. And I want to Mary Bisbee Beek has been chiming in on some of the things that have been said, and um, one of the things that she said, which I agree with, she was responding to the notion of how the book started out, as you said, it was like 394 pages, and how it was got got reduced a little bit. She says there's too much competition for our time. Internet has ruined people's concentration for long, intense novels. Do you think that there is something to that? I still love me a long, intense novel myself, I have
Mhm.
to say.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I think I really don't know what to say about that, except, I mean, I love long novels too. I read Deep River, which is, by Karl Melantes, which
Mhm.
is very long. I'll always love the Russian novels. For whatever reason, I think with Shoalwater, um, I did realize in the revision of it that had been fairly repetitive, which was kind of an eye opener
Huh.
in going back to scenes and fleshing them out and making them shorter. So I kept, I think, all of what I most um, wanted to keep in the book, but I just had to streamline it. Um, so
Okay.
I don't know. I think readers are very different, and I think some you don't want to bore readers. I know Peter Montfort at Hugo House. He'll take page by page, and he'll say, if you can't really keep someone interested on every single page of a book, you've got a lot of work to do. So
Well, we have a question from Marlene that I think ties into this. She says, Kip, would you describe your experience working with your agent slash editor, shaping your novel, how did that affect your revisions? Did you sometimes override suggestions for changes in the manuscript? Or how did you balance being receptive and humble with being assertive as the artist and storyteller?
Mhm. That's a great question. Thank you
It's a
for
big
that.
question.
Yeah. So I'll speak directly to who worked with me, Anne Depew. She used to be an editor at Sasquatch Books, and then she became an agent. And Claire Meeker referred her to me. And she was the one who made the suggestion that I change the book. I have always opened with the seal legend, but that I change the chronology and have it open with Kate and Andy coming to Nova Scotia, disillusioned by the Vietnam War. And I responded to her suggestion. She didn't tell me how to do it. She just said, "This is what I think you should do." And I think the basic reason I responded to her um, suggestion was because it is true as a writer, I wanted to be authentic about the experience of being an American going to Nova Scotia. I wasn't a Nova Scotian. So to open the book with the Nova Scotians being the main characters, I realized there was some weakness in that because I learned a lot about them, but they weren't they I felt like they needed to be seen through my eyes. I wanted to be true to who I am as an author. And I think I became very sensitive to that working at the library in Nova Scotia. Basically, Canadians often viewed me as somebody who had a Canadian job, an American living in an inshore
Oh,
fishing community.
okay.
And I was very sensitive to the Canadian sensibility. Um, and I think that helped me think, yes, this book will be more authentic if I started off with Kate and Andy coming and then fit in the Nova Scotian, characters from their lives and how they fit into each other's lives. So basically, I'm working with Anne to go back to Marlene's question. Um, Anne was not a line by line editor. She didn't really go through the book and, highlight and ask questions. What she did was ask me very simple questions. And I think I've shared this before. Um, for example, Verlene, the Nova Scotian character married to Ivan at Slate Harbor, was a hair cutter. And so Kate had long hair and was getting tired of her life. And so, and kind of upset with how things were going. And so Anne asked me very simply, "Who cuts Kate's hair?" And that just, I suddenly was writing a whole chapter about Kate going into Verlene's hairdressing salon and having Verlene cut her hair. And it was a very tense scene because by that point, Kate and Verlene knew that they loved the same man. So that's an example of how working with an editor can impact you. But what I enjoyed so much about working with Anne is it was sort of like, I guess you'd say in the Zen Buddhist, you point the way, you don't tell someone the way, but you point to the way. And that's how I so appreciated working with her. That's how she worked with me.
And I'd like to add that Marlene Blessing, who's also in our class, is a very astute editor. I've worked with her for 30 years. She's edited 3 of my books, and she is herself writing a novel now, which we all really adore. And having these intimate relationships with people who become friends, my first editor, Judith Jones, the great editor at Knopf, we traveled together. And I've had other editors and agents who went on book tours with me. And this is precious. And we call ourselves the Salish Sea writers, which Kip is part of. But having this kind of intimacy with people who are also helping you create books. Mary Bisbee, I want to shout out to her, is just extraordinary. I told her on the phone the other day, I think of her as old wealth in the publishing business compared to the new wealth that is people who may or may not even have a tenure as editors, they kind of come and go. So these are to be treasured, these relationships. And I can only say that most writers need this kind of intimacy to even get to the point where they can publish. So we're very fortunate to have a lot of that here in the Northwest.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to speak to Brenda because there I was in class with Brenda and Claire Meeker for quite a number of years. And here Brenda has published 23 books. Claire has probably published 13 books. And there I was with Shoalwater, and I wasn't being successful at getting it published. And I would kind of look at them and say, wow, you still want to work with me? I still haven't been able to get this book out there. But they were so supportive. I mean, that's what's been so wonderful about, you know, the world that Brenda's introduced me to in the community of writers. It's
Well,
not,
I have to say that being 100% a reader and not a writer, but very much a reader, and becoming familiar with the writing community of the Pacific Northwest, working with the authors and lining up events, it's overwhelming to me, the sheer, just the community. There's such a sense of community, um, and it's really a beautiful thing to observe, really. Just event after event, I love listening to authors, to writers talk about their 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 people. It's really wonderful. Um, Lindsay, talking about, you were speaking earlier about Nova Scotia. Um, Lindsay says that she says, Kip, you have so many wonderful details in your book about life in Nova Scotia. Did you keep a journal during your years there?
yes, I've always been a journal keeper for
Okay.
sure. Um,
Okay.
yeah, for sure. I would say that, and you know, when you live in a place and you work with the people who are native to the place, they kind of become a part of you. You learn a lot about them, and I love nature. You know, Lopez now is my home, so the Atlantic and the maritime climate and the maritime rock and the Atlantic were all very much a part of the book. I mean, I actually think Nova Scotia is one of the main characters in the book. I always held true to that. And the seal kind of emerges out of the place, um, becoming a character, sort of a mythic character. So that's always been very important to me. Yeah. I did a lot of research, I will say that, and aside from just having journals. My Bible was Images of Lunenburg County by Peter Bars, and he actually recorded the Nova Scotian inshore fishing community and then transcribed it. And he also took photographs. So I just kept that book by my side, and that helped me with the dialect. I had to make a big decision about um, dialect, how much to how to make it readable, but still have things like you and you know, but or all not that kind of thing. Nova Scotia was settled by German Huguenots, so there's a heavily Germanic tone in the way they speak and a certain kind of rhythm. So I tried to capture that in the dialogue.
Okay. We have So Miss Iris is in the audience, of course, and she has a question for you. You mentioned Iris and
I
her
did,
book that just came out, Writer in a Life Vest. We are
yeah.
very excited to be hosting Iris on April 9th at Village Books. Iris has a question for you. She
Okay.
says, please talk about your short story writing. What's it like to go from the long form of the novel and shift to short stories?
Well, that's a good question. And Iris's book is essays and some poems, so I can understand why you're asking that question, Iris. Um, I appreciate how hard it is to write a short story. You know, with a novel, you kind of have more time and character development. And I would say, well, for example, my short story Tattoo Emporium, that actually came out pretty quickly. and easily. Brenda worked with me on that. Um, it's much more concise. I would say the metaphor, the image has to really be packed. Um, and the story kind of, uh, I guess it's a smaller piece of clay that you're working with, but that doesn't take away from the shape that you're trying to create. It's just smaller, it's more precise. Um, but it's hard. I'm not trying to say because it's short, it's easy. I think short can be difficult as well. And I enjoy short stories. I actually, and I also write some poems. They're a nice break from a novel. I mean, I do admit when I think about writing another novel, I think, oh boy, do I have the energy to write another novel? And maybe what I'll do is write short pieces, like Iris has short pieces in Writer in a Life Vest. Thought, well, maybe I could put together, short pieces, poems, and who knows where this will all go. But all of this is to say, I appreciate all the forms. I appreciate the short story, the essay, the poem, and the novel. They all have different qualities to them.
Okay, I think we have time for one maybe last question. And this is from Margaret, who says, regarding plot development, was there a time when you really hit the wall with your plot and felt overwhelmed or lost in it and could not see where it needed to go? If so, how did you swim out of that swamp?
Love the metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it's interesting. I did kind of know from the very beginning um, where I wanted to go with the plot, and I can't explain why. Um, I think the accident was there was a real accident in Nova Scotia. I changed it. So what happened in reality did not happen in my book, but the accident was a very clear directive for me, building up to how the accident happened, what would happen after the accident. Um, if I was in the swamp, I would say it had to do more with character development going through the plot. Um, because I wanted the plot to have complexity to it and the characters engaged with the plot to have complexity to them in their relationships. It wasn't like I never actually had, little pieces of paper up on the bulletin board, a
Okay.
plot driven. It was not a plot driven book. It was definitely a character driven book with this accident in that led up to 2/3 of the way through. So, did I get stuck? Yes. I think I described it a little differently. I got stuck when it was chronologically told, and I got freed up when I changed the timing
Hmm.
and started with Kate and Andy coming to Nova Scotia at the beginning. Somehow I was able to just kind of, wow, look at all this writing I've done. And now Kate and Andy are coming to Nova Scotia, and I can bring in this part of the past, and I can flash forward to that. And it was actually kind of fun. But I would say that was where I was stuck, was when it was in the chronological form and I changed the timing.
Okay. Well, we have a special treat right now, right? Towards the end here of the event. First of all, I want to thank everybody for your questions. I want to thank everybody who's come tonight. One of the questions was regarding a certain musical piece, whether there was one and whether we might hear it this evening. So, I very quickly in the chat, I am putting the link to Village Books website, and I want to let everybody know that both of our authors this evening have graciously provided autographed book plates. Because we are remote, we don't have signed books, but we do have little plates with their name, with their signatures that we can send with books. So if you order a book from Village Books, we will send an autographed book plate with your book. But so I think, and we will come back and say goodbye after the musical piece. But Kip, do you want to introduce our next guest? Is Kip frozen?
I think she's setting it up with her husband Stanley, who's a musician.
Yes. Okay.
And unless she has.
She does look like she is frozen to me. But yes,
Okay.
Stanley, her partner Stanley Greenthal is going to perform a song for us, but it is looking to me like Kip is frozen. So Kip,
So maybe we could take another question. Is she
I
there?
think that actually, it looks like maybe she has left and will be coming back. I'm going to hope that's what's happening
Okay,
right now.
so
But there is a question for you, Brenda. There's a question that was for both of you, which was wondering if all novels or books are autobiographical to a certain degree. Is it possible to write a novel and not have it be autobiographical, even just a little?
you know, I wrote a novel called Animal Heart, in which I was in the point of view of animals at some points who had memories. And my agent at the time, Sarah Jane Fryman, who is a wonderful friend, said, Brenda, you have to remember your readers are human. And I took that to heart to a certain extent. One of the questions that someone asked earlier is how much advice do you take from your editors and agents, and how much do you, just go your own way? But I think most novels have some rooted or grounded place in some experience that the author understands. They may not have lived it directly. You might want to write something that belonged. I have a student whose grandmother had a really tragic life, and so she wrote about the grandmother, and she wrote from the point of view of the grandmother. So you could say that that was autobiographical, but it really wasn't her lived experience. It was her imagined lived experience.
Sure.
So I do think everyone always, Kip has said that's the question everyone has asked her: how much is autobiographical, how much is creative, writing? And I think it's really true that the closer you come to the self in fiction, sometimes the farther away you get from that character. Kip certainly had that with Kate. I've had that. Sometimes if you thoroughly imagine a character, you are much more able to create them in all of their complexities.
Okay. Well, thank you
Sorry,
for
we must,
answering that question while we waited for Kip and
yeah, we
Stanley
must
to
have,
come.
okay. Somehow we went frozen.
Yeah, we got
Yeah. All right.
from the
Well, here's what I'm going to
beginning.
do. I'm going to spotlight you so that you are
Thank you.
large and in
Thank you,
charge.
Brenda.
And
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Claire.
So what are we going to do?
So excited.
We'll do our song Shoal Water for you all. Thank you so much for requesting it. First October leaves turning gold and silver from the leaning willow limb that rises and falls, and far and wide, driven from their harbor, come the gray feathered wings to catch and to call. Yellow is the boat, deep golden yellow, the color of the earth that rides on the sea. Can I row long enough and strong enough? Can I pull the dory through shoal water to you? Leaving windy shores, drifting in the dory, my heart is at my back, in harbor no more. Can I row long enough and strong enough to bring this gift to you I bear from my home? In the failing light, moving through shoal water, the gray silent rocks that lie under foam, I fear for the boat. The waves are breaking over, but I trust in the gift I carry for you. Will you help me rowing through shoal water? The pearl is in my bow, I am keeping for you. I cannot keep the waves from breaking over, but I'll pull the dory through shoal water to you.
That was so beautiful. Thank you very much. That was that was such a lovely way to close for tonight. Ladies, do you have any final thing you'd like to say to everybody before we go?
Just a huge gratitude to Brenda, my longtime mentor, and to you, Claire, and also to Stanley. I think the song Shoal Water is what really kept me going.
And I would like to say so much gratitude to independent bookstores, to all of our editors, to people like Mary Bisbee Beek, who are also helping two of my other writers, Mary Ann Mercer and Kip, to bring their books into the wider world. And I am so proud and honored to have been part of your creations. Thank you, Kip.
Thank you, Brenda.
All right, and
Thank
thank you
you,
to you
Claire.
both. It
Thank
was
you so
my
much.
pleasure. This was absolutely delightful, and thank you to our audience. And with that, we'll say good night and be well, everybody.
Good night.
Bye bye.
Thank you.